Hi class, in this video we'll be doing the example titled blood pressure. So when 14 different medical students measured the blood pressure of the same person, they obtained the results listed below. Construct a 95% confidence interval for mu, or the population mean. Assume that blood pressures are normally distributed. And then after the problem here, it gives me a list of data. So these are the blood pressures, likely the top number of your blood pressure for the same person, and they took it 14 different times. All right, so I'm asked to construct a confidence interval. So let's go ahead and use our formula chart to see what I have to do to get that confidence interval. Okay, so first off, we know that we are working with the parameter mu, or a population mean. So I'm going to find mu under the parameter table. And notice that I have two entries for mu, and it's going to depend on if I'm using the normal distribution or the student t distribution. All right, so I'm going to find the requirements column for mu, okay, and I'm going to look here to determine if I'm going to use the normal distribution or the student t distribution. So, for the normal distribution, the requirements are that sigma is known and a population is normally distributed, or sigma is known and my sample size is greater than 30. For the student t, my requirements are that sigma is unknown and the population is normally distributed, or sigma is unknown and my sample size is greater than 30. Well, the problem tells me to assume that blood pressures are normally distributed. It also gives me a sample set of data. So while it doesn't tell me anything about the standard deviation to where I could say automatically that I have a sigma or an S, I know that since I'm given just a small sample that I'm going to have S and not sigma. So I am going to assume that sigma is unknown, which means that I'm going to use the student t. All right, so now that I have determined that I'm going to use the student t, I find student t under the distribution column, and I'm going to look and use that row and look to where I find confidence interval. And it's going to tell me then how to find the confidence interval. All right, so under this, so with the student t row, I find my confidence interval. And I have two methods for finding that confidence interval. I'm either going to use the sample mean plus and minus the margin of error, but I'm not given a sample mean and I'm not given a margin of error. What's going to be easier for me is to use t-interval on the calculator, and that's exactly what I'm going to do. All right, so we know that I need t-interval. All right, so let me write a few things here. So since we are given a sample, sigma is unknown, so use student t. So we're going to use the t-interval. All right, so to do that, I'm going to have to go to my calculator, okay? All right, so now that I have pulled up my calculator, the first step that I have to do, since I'm given a list of data, is to input that data into L1. Just a reminder as to how to do that, I hit stat and then enter. You'll see here under L1, I already have my 14 blood pressures entered into my list. So once you do that, you're good to go. Take a moment to pause the video if you need to go ahead and enter that list so you can follow along. All right, so now that you've done that, let's go find the t-interval function. All right, so I'm going to go back to stat by hitting stat again, and I'm going to tab 2 to the right to tests. And then notice that t-interval is option 8. And notice now that my calculator automatically defaulted to stats, and this is probably because you've done a previous problem and you weren't given a list of data. This is the first one that we're doing that has a list of data, so you were using the statistics and not the data. So notice that that first item on your list is input, and you can choose between data or statistics. Well, I was given a set of data, so I need to switch that over to data. So I'm going to move my cursor once to the left to highlight data, and then I'm going to hit enter. And now my calculator has switched screens to the data screen for t-interval. And now my list of data looks like input, and I have the data highlighted. The next thing it asks for is the list. So this is the list I just entered into L1. So whatever list you used, you need to make sure that's the right one. I used L1, and I've got L1 listed here. Next is going to be a frequency list. Just leave it blank or put the number 1 there if you don't have a frequency list. Just leave it alone. We don't have a frequency distribution, so we're just going to leave it. And then next is my confidence level. I'm going to use 0.95 for my, and I'm going to use 0.95 for my confidence level. And then once I've got my confidence level, I'm going to highlight calculate and hit enter. Now, a note about student T. It takes a while. And notice that if I hit enter again, I'm going to get an error. Okay? All right, so don't hit enter twice. Only hit enter once and let it think. All right, so give me a second to go back to, and you'll get this error here. So give me a second to go back to our menu and run our function again so we can get our answer. Okay? That was just trying to demonstrate what happened if you get a little impatient. Yeah, student T sometimes takes a minute to run. All right, but just trust that student's thing for a minute. See, now it has popped up just fine. Again, if you hit enter too quick, you're gonna not have a good day. So here we have my readout, and my answer is going to be that first entry here with those 2 numbers inside the parentheses. All right, those represent my confidence interval. All right, so the answer on the readout is 129.29, comma 139.71 in parentheses. Now, the blue text on our slide, if you'll remember, indicates that when using a set of data, round your confidence intervals to 1 decimal place more than the original data. So my data was all whole numbers. I don't have a decimal place. So I'm going to use 1 more than 0 decimal places, which is 1 decimal place. So I'm going to round both of these numbers to 1 decimal place. So that means my answer is going to be 129.3 for my lower confidence limit and 139.7 for my upper confidence limit. All right? So my CI is 129.3 and 139.7. Okay? Again, right here I have written the interval notation with the parentheses like the calculator reads out. Pearson will sometimes use the inequality notation where you'll have your lower limit, so 129.3 less than your parameter. In this case, my parameter I'm working with is mu, and sometimes you will have to answer that, and then less than 139.7, which is the upper confidence limit. All right, and then once you have that, you're good to go.